the Asphalt Specifications webinar. My name is Mike Fitch with the Ohio LTAP Center here at ODOT, and we appreciate your participation. As we get started, please take a moment to locate the questions box in the GoToWebinar panel. During the presentation today, please use the questions box to send in any questions you might have. Looking at the handouts section of the GoToWebinar panel, please note also that several PDF items are posted and available for reference. With that, we will go ahead and turn things over to Dave Miller. Hello.
All right. Hi, everyone. Thanks, Mike. I want to make one quick note at the beginning with the handouts. There's an FAQ sheet in there that some of you may have gotten before, but that has been updated recently. So even if you have one, I would recommend downloading the handout. I'm Dave Miller with the Office of Pavement Engineering. I'm going to give kind of a general overview of the whole reorganization that we did, and then hand it over to Julie to cover the construction details, and then Eric for QC and mix design, and then Craig's going to bring it home with the plan prep and implementation. And just for fun, I wanted to start off with a little poll question to get a feel for the audience of how well they know how to do everything. So I think I got to hand it back to Mike to make that poll question come up.
Yeah, thanks, Dave. We will launch the poll question. So you'll see that on the screen, and we will give everybody some time to respond to the question.
And obviously, I mean, there's no wrong answer here. It's just for fun. If Eric Biehl wants to go in and say he struggles to understand the specs, I won't hold that against him. Yeah. So.
We see responses coming in already. Wow, already 70% of the attendees have voted, so that's great. A few more seconds and we will share the results. Okay, well, the results are 2% said expert, 32% said know them fairly well, 50% said I know what I need to know, 11% said they struggle to understand them and find what they need, and 5% said not familiar.
All right, well, I phrased those questions pretty well. That's a pretty good normal distribution, I think, or pretty close to it. So hopefully, I thought we might have a few more experts than that, but that's all right. Yeah, know what I need to know. I figured that was going to be a pretty popular answer. Everybody knows their little part, but knowing the whole thing is a tough task. And this will kind of explain that. So you might be wondering, especially if you were maybe the unfamiliar people, I guess, why bother reorganizing? So what I got across the bottom here is kind of what I consider, the foundation of all the other specs. So these are the basics that all the other specs refer to. And then across the middle is all the pay items, and across the top are the acceptance methods. And so to make everything work, there's references. So 301 references 401, 441 references 401, 441 references 448. And if you draw all these connections, you come up with some crazy thing that looks like this. So definitely for anyone who said they struggle with it, I think this, explains why. One of the things I really enjoy pointing out here is I got 441 here pointing over to 442, which also then circles back and points back into 441. So if this thing was a computer program, it'd be stuck right there. So our goals for the whole thing were just untangle this web, and really everything I could put as a sub-bullet to that, because that was the overarching goal. We wanted to take those foundational specs and kind of isolate them in silos so that they only had specific information for that part of the process. So one for laydown and field operations, one for plant operations, one for QC requirements, and then one for all the in-com and mixed design requirements. We wanted to keep the pay item numbers the same, and we were successful in that, but we did actually change the pay item descriptions. So for some things, the full item extension number is going to have to change. But we didn't, 301 is still 301 and that sort of thing. We didn't want to shuffle any of those around. We didn't restrict ourselves if we needed to add something, and we did add a couple new items. Reduce the exceptions and cross references. That's kind of the same as untangling the web, but the idea there is in the future we hopefully can just kind of plug and play with new specs or changing something, and it won't break all these links or cause a lot of problems, and so make the future revisions easier. And then lastly, we didn't want to make a lot of technical changes. That was both, we didn't want to make technical changes with the current specs while we were in the process, because it was hard to keep track of where those changes needed to be in the new specs. And then we didn't want to hide a bunch of technical changes in the new specs and nobody really be aware of them. And we didn't want to look like we were trying to do something nefarious there. So we still have all the same specs we had before. Like I said, we added 440 and 449, and we still have plenty of references across all this. But what I like to point out here is that on the bottom half of the screen there, everything is totally symmetrical. So there's 4 lines coming out of all the pay items pointing to all 4 of the boxes on the bottom. So if we wanted to, completely revise 403, we could just pull it out, put a new one in there, and it wouldn't break anything, wouldn't cause any problems. So I'm just going to go quickly through all the specs and make some quick comments on what we did, and then hand it off to the others to go a little bit more in depth. 401, the old name was Asphalt Concrete Pavements General, so we renamed it as Asphalt Concrete Field Operations. So anything with the binder or wrap and raz or mixing or any of that was all removed from here. And then the whole thing was reorganized quite a bit within itself to try to be in more logical order, and the order things happen in the field and that sort of thing. We split out the equipment requirements and put those up front, and then how you're using the equipment comes later and that sort of thing. 402 got quite a bit larger, I'd say. A lot of things were brought into here. The name didn't change. Even the name of the calibration section didn't change, but in the old spec, that's just a reference to 403, and all the calibration information was actually in 403. Now it's been brought in 402. So there's a lot of new information have been brought into here from elsewhere. 403 had some of the most extensive changes. It's kind of hard to see here because it really didn't add a whole lot of new lines, but a lot of information from 441 was brought into here. Almost all of 441 was brought into here, really, which you'll see later. And then we added this new item 440. Like I said, it's got the mix design requirements that apply to all the different mixes. So stuff from 401 and stuff from 441 was all brought here and brought together. 301 and 302 didn't change hardly at all. There was a little bit of information I think that got pulled out of there and puts, I think, in 401. And then they kind of got, again, reorganized a little bit, renaming convention, try to make them everything more consistent across not only these 2 specs, but all the specs. 424, again, didn't change a whole lot, but it had its own quality control section. So whatever was in there probably got moved to 403. If they even needed to be repeated, it might have been information that really didn't need to be separated out. 441, this again kind of got decimated. All the quality control stuff that was in here basically moved to 403 or moved somewhere else, and it was renamed as being Marshall Asphalt Concrete to differentiate it then from 442, which is still Super Pave. Again, not a lot changed here, but it had its own quality control stuff, and so that got moved to 403. 443, we made some tweaks with things, but we really didn't change much at all. We kind of thought it was its own special item, so it still has its own quality control requirements in it. We thought it was better to leave them there than to move them elsewhere. 446 didn't really change very much. Reorganized it to make a little more sense in the order the information was there, and changed some terminology, again, just maybe for consistency. Same with 447, really didn't change much, moved things around just to make it read better and flow better. 448 doesn't look like it changed, but it did actually significantly. Now it is always the gauge density acceptance. So there's no, if it's less than an inch, if it's less than a mile or any of that, then you don't do gauge density testing. It's going to always be gauge density testing, and the designer will have to decide if they need to use 448 or if they need to use the new 449 item, which is the non-density acceptance. And so this brought in the roller and compaction requirements from 401 and acceptance tables from 403 and brought those in here. So that'll be a new item in parentheses on whenever non-density acceptance is used. And so that is my quick run through everything. There's my contact info. And if we have any questions for me right now, I can do that, or I can hand it off to Julie.
Thanks, Dave. We don't see any questions yet, but as a reminder to our audience, the questions box is open. So please feel free to type in any questions you might have, and we'll pause briefly between presentations for questions, and we'll also allow some time at the end of the webinar for additional questions. So, we have a question from Amy. Are the new specs available now?
No, they're not available yet. They're going to be released in the January quarterly release. We discussed briefly of offering a handout of a draft version, but we didn't want to let something go that hasn't officially been approved. And so unfortunately, you're going to have to wait until the January release.
Okay, thanks, Dave. And thanks, Amy, for the question. So we have just passed the presentation mode to Julie Miller, and welcome, Julie.
Hello, everyone. Thanks for being here today. I'm Julie Miller, the construction pavement engineer with the Office of Construction Administration. I'm the Asphalt Spec Committee chair for the department. The reorganization of the Asphalt Spec section of ODOT's spec book is something that I've felt has been needed for some time. With the really great and fantastic collaboration of the Office of Pavement Engineering and the Office of Materials Management, that reorganization has come together. So many thanks and a shout out to all of those who made that happen. This portion of the rollout deals with those construction-related specifications that ODOT inspectors and engineers use to ensure the work product meets all of the contractual requirements. I'm trying to page down, Mike, but that is not happening.
Okay,
there we go. I don't know what was happening there, but sorry for that brief blip. So what are we covering in this unit? Well, the major changes for construction folks are going to be in the new 401 section. The section's been pared down to field operations only, as Dave mentioned. Specs such as that were in the old 401 regarding RAP, for example, have been removed and replaced in placed into other relevant sections. So we're going to learn a little bit about a new spec section numbered 449 and about some major changes to some of the other acceptance methods. 446, 447, 448, 424 type A. Of course, you want to know how this affects you in the field. I would want to know that as well. If we've done our job, the impact of the field folks should be fairly minimal, meaning the big changes you are going to see in 40 that you will see are in 401 and the new 449 spec section. The revised 401 section will include specs for field operation only. The new 449 section is a method spec for asphalt pavement without a density specification. So those would be items like 301, 302. So just a reminder, 401 was asphalt, concrete, pavements, general. It is now asphalt, concrete, field operations, and this is to better reflect its revised content. Why the change? Well, the old 401 contained lots of information. It was very general, and it was just a mishmash of information, probably based on repeated changes to specs and spec books and looking for a place to put the information. For example, it included mixed design requirements, such as the wrap and RAS requirements, mixed plant operations, and of course, it also included all of the field operation information, temperature requirements, spreading equipment, joints, night paving, and etc. Well, why the change? Again, the reconfigured 401 contains only the requirements for field work. So temperature requirements, equipment types, anti-segregation requirements. The change should make the section easier to use in the field and easier to find the information you need for inspection. So where did all of that other stuff go? Well, here's a little look at that. Dave, in his presentation, provided this information as well. These old 401 sections went to the new 440, which is a mixed design requirement section that Eric Biehl is going to be introducing later. A lot of information went to 402, mixed plants, 403, quality control. And you can see from this list, this was all information that was in 401 that is now better represented in the other silos. So what about roller coverage? Well, the old 401, as you all know, contained those roller tables. It doesn't contain that anymore. That all went to 449. That is our new section called Asphalt Concrete Non-Density Acceptance. It is the method specification for the acceptance of asphalt that doesn't have a density requirement like 448 or 446 does. Just a reminder, I don't know why my screen keeps jumping. This isn't a new requirement. It's what we've always done. It just has a new name. So 449, asphalt concrete, non-density acceptance. So a little bit about 449. As previously mentioned, it is a new section. And as Dave pointed out, there will be new pay item extension codes. We're working on those currently. So like 448, 446, and 447 acceptance, there will be a 449 acceptance. So for example, the pay code for 301 asphalt concrete base will now be 301 asphalt concrete base, and in parentheses 449. That will be our acceptance method. So in addition to the roller coverage information that was brought into the new 449, this section also includes laboratory acceptance requirements from 403, which is our quality control section. For 448, this is a major change, and Dave pointed this out. All asphalt specified with 448 acceptance will have a density requirement, which is using supplement 1055, the asphalt mat density by gauge testing. So this is a major change. If you have 448 specified as a pay item, the density requirement is part of the spec. Just a couple other minor changes. The lab testing acceptance tables that were in 403 have been moved to 448. All other information stayed the same. 446 and 447, minor changes there. Requirements for monitoring and QC reporting were moved into their correct specs, in this case to 403, our quality control section. This is part of the reorganization aimed at untangling our specs section, particularly ODOT's QC and verification acceptance procedures, and Eric Biehl is going to get into that. 424 type A will have a new pay acceptance, the 449. Some weather, the other major, so that was the major change. Some other changes are reference related, just that it's a spec that refers to other specs. So weather limitations will be in 401 instead of including that information in 424, for example. So moving on, what about those other spec sections? Well, no, we didn't do anything. We didn't touch these. So here's a list: 407, 408, 409, 410, 411, 421, 422, and 423. So rest assured, these remain the same. And here's my contact information. If you want to jot that down, you can always give me a call or send me an email. But that was a brief introduction of the major changes that you folks out in construction will see. And with that, I'm ready to hand it off, Mike.
All right, thanks, Julie. We have time for a few questions. There is a question from Catherine. Could you please repeat the SS for the density requirement for 448?
That was a supplement, and that is 1055, supplement 1055, asphalt mat gauge density testing.
All right, thanks. And we have a few additional questions for the group. Question from Michael: will there be printed copies of the 2022 spec book, or will it all be digital?
Well, as of right now, we don't have a 2022 spec book. So the information with the reorganization, the reorganized spec sections are going to appear in the January 21st, 2022 quarterly update, the supplement 800, or supplemental spec 800, excuse me. So at this point, we don't know when a spec book will be printed.
Okay. Next question from Ram. How do these changes impact projects that are ready to award in January through March of 2022?
Craig, you want to tackle that? That is coming up in Craig's presentation.
Okay.
Yeah, Mike, let's maybe just hold off on that question. I think that'll be answered with a little bit later.
Sounds
There's
good.
a question at the end. We'll take it then.
Okay. Question from Stephen. Will ODOT expect cities to adopt these changes for LPA type projects?
Nobody wants to answer that one, but I'll try.
Yeah, thinking on it, Dave. Go ahead.
I think my answer is probably going to be yes. I mean, definitely if you're using ODOT's item master, it's going to have them, given the timeline that Craig's going to lay out. I mean, it's, there really isn't a lot of change as far as, like I say, plan development or anything, just adding that 449 acceptance. Other than that, the work is all the same. So I don't know why you wouldn't want to adopt them, really.
Thank you for that. Let's do two more questions and then we'll move on with Eric's presentation. So question from Anthony. How about small quantity acceptance? Is there any change or update for that?
Eric, I don't know if
The,
you want to take one or not, but as far as I know, we did not tackle that.
yeah, the small quantities is a policy anyways. It's not part of the spec book currently.
Okay. All right, I tell you what, let's proceed with Eric. We have additional questions arriving, which is great, but Eric, we'll turn things over to you.
All righty, thanks, Mike. I'm Eric Biehl. I'm the asphalt materials engineer at the Office of Materials Management. I pretty well see every day materials operations and mix design approvals and all that fun stuff. I'll be discussing some of the mix plans, mix designs, and the QA process item codes. So kind of going back to Dave's slide, with the new organization, we laid it out a lot better. Now we kind of have three categories: acceptance, mix types, and requirements, where we had the mix types were kind of mix types and some requirements, and in some cases we even did acceptances in some of the mix types. So these are some changes that we've been talking about probably since 2014, 2015, and the work to do all these revisions was a lot of time. And I guess if we were to say anything positive that came out of COVID, would have been the fact that we were given some time to be able to do this. So, well, let's jump into 402. So, pre-reorganization 402 is, I would say, pretty basic. It kind of briefly talks about plant calibrations and references Supplement 1101. Supplement 1101 houses our plant calibrations. 10 years ago, the spec book 402 actually had the mixed plant calibrations in it, but we pulled those out. The supplement's just easier to update at that point. Then it talked about some polymer binder. It had a section polymer binder, which was basically SBR specific. And then it mentioned water injection, warm mix asphalt. A lot of cases, if you wanted to know something about a mix plant that wasn't probably warm mix related, you had to go to other specs. So you went to 401, 403, and in some cases 402 wasn't the first place you looked, which isn't what we want. We want everything where I want to know something about mixed plants. I know 402 is where I need to go. I want to know QA processes. I know 403 is where I'm going to go. So basically what we ended up doing, brought in sections of 403 in that talked about calibrations and quick cals that are required. Anti-strip additive storage feeding systems that are mentioned in 441. The wrap and RAS processing requirements, what the requirements are at the plant, the screens and all that are mentioned in 401 were brought in. We expanded the warm mix asphalt section. The original section was pretty much put in 2008, and it was water injection specific. We had the definition of what warm mix was. There's still a section on water injection, and then we added another section for other warm mix asphalt technologies. Currently, the spec book doesn't allow other technologies. We've allowed them to be used, but we want to make sure that that some of the future changes that we're looking at, that we can use other warm mix asphalt technologies like chemical additives and stuff like that. Change the polymer binder section. That's basically the post-blended SBR polymer requirements. Mixing and production related to the plant, so some of the ag prep, binders, stopping production, the things that are mentioned in 401 and 441, brought those in, and then brought the loading and hauling requirements in the 401. And I believe some of the loading and hauling requirements are still in 401. since that's also part of hauling's part of laydown. So kind of the overview that Dave shared earlier, it kind of went from a generic, basic type of mixed plant item to basically a one-stop shop. 403 was probably the biggest one to kind of deal with. 403 was QC and acceptances. It contained the quality control plan, some information on plant calibration, some basic stuff about QC testing. It pretty much referenced 441 for most stuff, and then talked about basic mix criteria. Went into VA testing and some of the requirements related to that. We had a section called unconditional acceptance, and then the 448 acceptance tables were in there. 25 years ago, we had one acceptance. It was 448. So 403 originally was developed around 448. As we've developed more acceptances, 446, 447, things were added to 403. They were added to other sections, and pretty much got diluted. Things just stopped making sense, I guess. So some of the goals, concerns, as a QC technician, ODOT monitor, you had to look at numerous specs to find answers on what to do. I like to reference like a goosebump book where if you do this, you got to go to this page, but if you're going to do this, you got to go to this other page. That's kind of how our spec books were laid out. Hard to train newer staff because it was confusing. Why do I have to look at two locations to know whether my QC test met specs or not? And some things were not clear. So just kind of an overview of what stayed, what changed, what got moved. The 448 acceptances, they definitely got moved to 448 and 449. So the mixed testing part of 448 stays with the new 448. That's density only. And then that table also goes to 449 for the non-density 448 acceptances. So the new reorganization, and now it's all about QC VA testing. We renamed it to Quality Assurance Program. Still has a quality control plan. We have the sections sampling, how to sample a mix. It was brought up. It was mentioned in 403 and 441. QC testing, which was mainly 441, and then the reporting section, mainly 403. 446 still mentioned it. 448 mentioned reporting. Mixture deficiencies, brought those in to 441. What do you do when testing's out, and so forth. The VA testing pretty much stayed the same. Kind of reworded some stuff. Changed the name of unconditional acceptance to restricted acceptance. And that section pretty much stayed the same. So 403 in general probably, which like I said, was one of the bigger changes when it came to read the reorganization portion of it, of the whole process. So here's kind of again a general overview of what was previous and what's new. So 440, which is asphalt mix design, so it did not exist previously. So 441 was originally the mix design location. Brought in 441 and 442 on how to perform and submit a mix design. Brought in the RAP and RAS requirements from 40104. Anti-strip additives, 441. Tonnage conversions for designs that don't have volumetric designs, so 301s and 424 type A's. The kind of general goal for 440 was to house like basic mix design requirements that applied to all mix designs, and then you would go to the specific mix types for gradation requirements and binder requirements and volumetric requirements, etc. So, as brought up mentioning, most of it came from 401, 441, and some of 442. So 441, 25 years ago, it was originally developed as the one-stop shop for mix design, submittals, mix requirements, anti-strip additives, JMF adjustments, monitoring, plant labs, QC testing, and mixture deficiencies. We had just one mix type then, Marshall Mix Designs. Like I said, this was all done before Super Pave became a thing in Ohio. As we added stuff with Super Pave and some other items, 441 became diluted. Other sections had 403, 401 had stuff mentioned as well. The reorganization removed everything that wasn't related to Marshall mixes. Most things moved to 440 and 403. So 440 would have been the mix design, the composition section, and 403 would have been all the QC testing. So basically the composition requirements, acceptance, and basis of payment remain. 440 went from approximately 11 pages to 2 pages to show you how much it changed. So that's kind of the general overview. A lot of things are pulled out of it. So that's all I had. I don't know if there's questions. I think it looks like there's at least a few.
Yes, thanks, Eric. And let's do a few questions before we turn things over to Craig. So, question from Roger. Can we assume that Go forms will need to be updated?
Yes,
Thank you,
can
Julie.
make that assumption.
All right. Question from Bart. There have been some plan notes for 302 with density acceptance. Has that been incorporated into this new spec reorganization?
The simple answer is no. Like I said, the general goals of the whole reorganization was to not make major spec changes. It's mainly to move things to the proper position. There was some minor stuff that needed to change just because it wasn't relevant anymore, but in general, no. That's not added. At some point it will be, but it wasn't part of the reorganization.
Yeah, I was going to say it wasn't added as part of the reorganization, but with the reorganization, it can be easily plugged in at any time.
All right, thanks, Eric and Dave. We have a question from Carrie. Will 448 density be applicable on all projects, or is the 1 continuous mile minimum still required?
Well,
we're going to go over that in just a second, Mike.
Yep.
Okay.
So
On that note, let's turn things
Carrie
over
has
to
more.
Craig.
Carrie has more questions. We'll answer them then.
Okay.
Do you have another question, Mike, or do you want to?
Let's go ahead, Craig, with your presentation, and then we'll wrap things up with additional questions. Okay.
Well, we should be done plenty early, so we should have plenty of time to address everybody's questions here at the end. I'm sure there's going to be a few more roll in. Again, I'm Craig Landefeld from the Office of Pavement Engineering, and I just want to go over some of the designer guidance and how this implementation is going to happen from the ODOT perspective here. If I can get my slide, there we go. So kind of the why change. We talked about, we added the major change is adding this new pay item, and as been discussed previously, there was a lot of cross and circular references. The organization of the book had become, more and more illogical. It's definitely evolved over decades, literally, of changes to our specifications. And, as those changes happen, they were, at the time implemented to make them work contractually, but over time, that's just left things in some illogical spots, and we thought that a cleanup would be in order. We've had, folks come to us from other organizations who aren't really familiar with ODOT or specs, and it's just virtually impossible for someone to sit down and read our specification the way it currently is and really understand what you need to do to produce, get JMFs, produce asphalt for the state of Ohio, and then accept it out on the road and what all those requirements are. Becomes very difficult for people who aren't familiar with it. So hopefully this reorganization will help eliminate some of those confusion points and make the spec a lot more clear as to what is actually expected of you when you work for the Department of Transportation. One of the other items that came up routinely, there was just a question on, will the density spec be required on all projects? And, the mile, the inch, the variable course, caveats that were baked into the spec have been there for a long time. Those 448 and, added the density requirement. So, the way that was done makes 448 look to be a very small spec currently, until you say, oh, I got to do 1055, and you go pull out that supplement and realize, wow, I got a lot more to do. So there was a lot of confusion there. We would internally at ODOT sell projects and get a lot of questions on, well, this one specified an inch, but it's, we're not milling, so that's not uniform, and all these caveats that would come up over the years. And so we're hopeful that this should eliminate some of that confusion. Again, why add 449? Well, it makes the specifying acceptance methods consistent across all of our specs. Several years back, we made the move to kind of the parentheses at the end telling you which acceptance was going to be used. And this change allows us to kind of follow through with that and have it consistent across all of our asphalt specs. And then as was brought up, it was, hey, did you guys add the density projects into these base mixes? And the short answer right now is no, but that does allow for a simpler transition to density specs. And I would expect that there might be some changes to those in the relatively near future, where ODOT's going to maybe want to make some of those kind of transitions for certain specs and certain projects. So this setup really allows that to happen pretty seamlessly and not cause major disruptions when we go to would go to do something like that in the future, or if other acceptance methods come into play in the future and ODOT wants to change something and make another acceptance method. It's very plug and play by the way the specs have been reorganized to not cause a ripple effect that causes a lot of disruption. So one of the questions might be coming up is, I think we said, well, hey, will this be out with the 2022 spec book? And Julie said, well, there is no 2022 spec book. And you might logically say, well, why didn't you just wait till then? Well, that was kind of the plan. The plan was that there would be a 2022 spec book, and we began working on this with the group, in preparation for that. So all these things would be ready to roll out with the new spec book. But just like with everything else in life, the last couple of years, our plans changed, and we had to adapt. When the spec book rollout for the new printed book was delayed, that meant that we basically either would have to maintain these changes for another, who knows how long, maybe a year, until the next spec book was ready to be printed. And we felt like that with all the changes that would likely happen over the next year or 2 years to our asphalt specifications, there would be no way that we'd be able to maintain the changes that we've made and mesh all that together without having some issues. So basically, we felt like we would start over with this major effort that had already been ongoing, and we felt that it was a really important effort, something that really needed to happen. So while this implementation may not be the most ideal, we don't think it'll be too disruptive to folks. There certainly will be some changes, and some folks may disagree, but I think if you keep in perspective what the changes actually are, they're pretty minor. It would have been nice to have the spec book implementation process to run these through, but that didn't happen, and that's not going to be able to happen. So we'll talk a little bit in a moment about what we're going to do. So what is item 449? We've talked about this before, but just kind of to reiterate and talk about some of the designer thoughts on this. It's a new non-density acceptance method. And basically this brings together the 301, 302 acceptance that came through 40305. We're already talking a lot of references here. And the item 448 non-density acceptance. So it takes all this roller coverage stuff that we do in the field on base courses, variable courses, short projects, little bridge tie-ins, driveways, guardrail, stuff under guardrail, all these other places where we don't measure density. This brings those together kind of into one spot. This is a method-based acceptance. So, we tell you what roller to bring, we run some calculations on, what the laydown can be based on the roller train provided, and there's some of those specific things. There's not been any changes to that. So all the rules that existed, maybe some that you don't like 3-wheel rollers or something, still exist today. So nothing changed there. We really wanted to focus on trying to keep the specs consistent to what they are today. So if you knew how to place asphalt this year, you should know how to place asphalt next year. You just might need to look for a different spot to find the spec language you're looking for. The project staff, must still calculate roller capacity. Again, nothing changed there. The contractor has to provide these specified rollers, and then that's maximum placement rates determined from those calculations. So that's the 449 non-density acceptance. And that means that item 448 is now only used for gauge density items. So if you had an item that is, again, under the inch threshold, or a variable course, or driveways or things like that, those are all going to be moved and have 449 parentheses extensions to them. Now the 448 will only be used for gauge density items, and the designer is going to have to make that choice when you set up the plans. The design guidance will be in the PDM, and some of that stuff we'll talk about in a moment. So when do I use item 449? All base courses are going to now need the item 449 extension. And you can see here an example, 302 asphalt concrete base, parentheses, 449. That's literally all the changes. Nothing changed day to day in how you accept asphalt from the old specs to the new specs. It just has this parentheses 449 in it. Item master will be updated. Those will be the only available items moving forward after the old items are retired. So that'll be the only choice you'll have. Should be pretty simple. Similarly with 424, fine graded polymer asphalt, type A. It's less than an inch always. It only has a roller acceptance. It will always have 449. Item master will be updated to handle that. Where the choices will come in is on the mixes where they would have specified 448 potentially previously, and just let the spec take care of it. So let's think about maybe you're doing a bridge project and you're going to do 500 foot or 1,000 foot of asphalt replacement on either side of the structure. Previously, you probably would have specified item 448 for some of those items, and then just let that short distance, being less than a mile, take care of the acceptance criteria. Now the designer will need to make that decision, but the rules didn't change. We just took the language out of the spec and moved it into designer guidance. So courses less than an inch of specified thickness, so a uniform course specified at an inch, would, if it's less than that, would use item 449. Courses that are variable thickness, so if we're doing leveling or some kind of a wedge course, any variable thickness courses, item 449. Projects that are less than a mile in length, that's the other big trigger. So short sections where it really doesn't make sense to set up for gauge or a lot of coring, that's where we're still going to be using item 449. Or we will be using item 449. That's always been a method-based acceptance for those criterias in our current spec, and nothing's changed there. The designer will just need to make that choice. So again, the designer has to choose the acceptance method. It's no longer baked into the spec, so that choice will have to be made. The PDM will provide further guidance. There's also the 2022 AC Spec Reorg FAQ that's attached in the webinar today that you can download. I would encourage you to do that. That's been kind of a living document, and I'm sure as things change again, we'll probably post that again at a few locations on our website. Or if you have questions, feel free to get in touch with us and ask. If you'd like an updated version of that as we go through time here. But designer guidance should be out and available. That will be rolled out with the spec rollout. The spec reorg FAQ gives you a little preview of what's coming. Doesn't have all the official guidance in there, but should give you, between today and reading that, should answer a lot of the questions that you may have, moving forward and putting some of these things into action. So the big questions for some, are going to be, when does this go into effect? So Item Master is currently being updated. Office Estimating is anticipating mid-December, they'll have all the new items added. So those will be set up with all the new parentheses 449 items. Again, some of these items are used relatively frequently, but the vast majority of your items that ODOT sells, are going to be density items for most of our projects. The big ticket items will be that. So we're not talking about updating every asphalt item in your plan. Just the ones that would be needed for method acceptance will need updated. They will have new item extensions so that they can be retired through this process with estimating. So we're really anticipating, you're going to need to update your your general summaries and some of the item descriptions that may trickle through the plans. It'll be rolled out January 21st, 2022. That's when the SS800 will be published, and it'll have all the new asphalt specifications incorporated then. Plan packages submitted to central office with a plan package submitted deadline of after January 21st will require the updates for the 449 items. Projects submitted with a deadline previous to that will be sold using the current version of the spec, so the October 15th, 2021 SS800. So if we look at a chart, this is from the Office of Estimating, their standard letting process. Basically what we've done is shifted the implementation of the SS800 for 1/21/22 by 1, 2, 3, 4 lettings here. So we've gave you about a month, sliding that down. So any projects with this 1/24/22, that plan package submitted date will need the updates. If we move to the extended letting process, very similar, move 4 lettings. So 2/7/2022, if that's when you're planning on submitting packages to central office, that's when the updates will have to be put into place. We've coordinated this with the Office of Estimating, talk contracts, construction, big coordinated effort here to try to make this go off, as smooth as possible. I would anticipate there will be a hiccup or two. We may have to issue some addenda to straighten some things out. Won't be the end of the world. Again, keep in mind, not all the items changed, just the ones without density, moving to that 449 specification. So plan updates should be a little minor, or should be minor. So you're maybe saying, so why tell me about it now if it's not coming out for a few months? Well, there will be these plan changes required, and without that spec book implementation time period that we had hoped for, it just makes things a little bit more difficult to implement these kind of changes when you've got some pay items that need updated. We've worked through the process in the past and worked through it. I don't anticipate that this should cause us a whole lot of issues. And realistically, if a mistake is made and it does get clear out to the project, it should be relatively easy to address, because the mistake should actually revert us to a lesser acceptance criteria. So even if the contractor didn't recognize it and ask a pre-bid question and it made it all the way out to construction, and we said, hey, this doesn't make sense for gauge testing, I don't think it's going to cause too big of an issue for the contractor or the project staff to say, well, yeah, this was the intent. We'll write a change order to make it go that way. The pavement design manual update will be coming out. Wanted to make sure everyone's aware of that, and that will flesh out some of this guidance and when to use some of these things. And also, again, making sure that everyone realizes that FAQ is in the handout section of the presentation today. I think that'll be a pretty valuable resource to go through, and Dave did a real nice job of breaking that out into different sections that might be more applicable to you. So with that, I think we'll take some questions, but before that, I did want to thank everyone who participated. Julie mentioned the 3 offices and the multiple people within the offices there, and also Eric Heckert in District 2. Eric, spent a lot of time working with us in addition to his normal daily job duties up there. So I want to say thanks to him for taking the time to read through that and participate. And a big thanks to Dave Miller. Dave really drove a lot of this stuff and kept some of us on track, and certainly kept us organized. I can honestly say that if I was responsible for keeping us as organized, we would have probably failed and had to stop. But Dave kept us on track and kind of kept us moving. Appreciate him and Eric and Julie and some of the other folks at OMM for participating as well. So with that, Mike, that's the end of our presentation, I think. And we can
Okay. Yes, thanks, Craig. And we do have some questions for the panel, and we might have covered some of this material by now, but it's okay to emphasize for these responses. So question from Michael, are these changes immediate or by proposal note?
So the changes won't be by proposal note. The changes will be immediate upon release of the SS800. So I know we've got a lot of locals and folks on the line, so maybe it'd be good to explain for some what SS800 is. SS800 is a quarterly rollout that's put on the front of all of ODOT's title sheets, and I assume some of the locals would utilize SS800 as well. But that's all the updates for every quarter to that spec book, right? So when January's publish date comes out, that will go live, and when it has that on the title sheet, those contract requirements are in effect. So there won't be anything special in the proposal. There won't be any special proposal notes. It'll be the 800 date that's listed on the title sheet of our plans.
All right, thanks, Craig. Question from Juan Pablo. Can someone explain the comment more about the small quantity is not part of the spec?
There's nowhere in the spec book that references small quantity currently under other than 40307, which is the unconditional acceptance, which basically says you can't do it. It's really a policy that we have in our sampling and testing manual that we utilize. So.
All right,
Eric,
thank you. Oh, go ahead.
I was just going to say it may be good to clarify when Eric's talking about small quantity, he's talking about small quantity acceptance of asphalt at the plant. I'm assuming that's what is being referred to at the question, not just when I have small quantities of asphalt, what do I use for an acceptance method? So
yeah, that's correct. Yep.
Thank you for that. Question from David. We had mentioned the pavement design manual. Will that be updated at the same time to reflect these changes?
Yes, the pavement design manual those changes have already been drafted, and they will be published with the January rollout along with the specification.
All right, question from Zach. Will supplemental specs such as 856 and 860 be updated simultaneously?
Yes, there'll be anywhere where it references the 400 sections or the 300 section, those have been updated. I don't think there were anywhere else that we pulled stuff from the supplemental spec. Probably the only supplemental spec that really got changed was supplemental spec 861, which was the 12.5 intermediate that just came out earlier this year that we just decided to put in the spec book with the reorganization.
All right, thanks, Eric. Question from Kenny. You mentioned using 449 for projects less than a mile in length. Is that centerline mile or lane mile?
So it's actually it's centerline mile, and it has to be in at least 2 lanes also. So I guess if you want to do it on a lane mile basis, it'd be at 2 lane miles minimum, but it really needs, it's 1 continuous mile and at least 2 adjacent lanes.
All right, thank you. Question from Bart. Will design guidance encourage driveways and similar work where roller coverage acceptance makes the most sense to be placed into separate items from the mainline paving item? Some districts already do this, others don't.
Good question.
You got that one, Dave?
There's nothing in the current update to the PDM that would encourage that, no. I don't know how districts decide when they want to do that and when they don't.
I think that, I mean, the triggers for density requirements would kind of naturally drive you that way unless a driveway meets some of these other requirements for some reason, an exceptionally long and rebuilt driveway. It would naturally send you that route.
All right. Well, folks, we have reached 11 a.m. and this has been a great webinar presentation. So we're going to wrap things up, but to our audience, you do have the email addresses for the speakers from today. So please feel free to touch base with any additional questions. And I want to thank Dave, Julie, Eric, and Craig for presenting today. And thanks everybody for your participation. We appreciate it.